All right, welcome everybody. It got quiet in here really fast. I feel like I missed my calling as like a teacher or a nun or something, but I want to welcome you all, folks that are here in person and folks that are viewing in online. My name is Zach Whiting. I'm the Policy Director and Senior Fellow for Better Tech for Tomorrow, which is TPPF's Technology Policy Initiative. I want to thank our friends at FAI, the Foundation for American Innovation, the great team, Luke and Trin, for helping to spearhead, co-organize and co-sponsor this event. And to learn more about them, you can go to their website at thefai.org. And Derek, if you're in the room, not to confuse that with the Ohio State University, but yeah, thefai.org. And more importantly for you guys, thank you for encouraging the broader discussion of things like technology and society, and it's very nice to have y'all back in Texas. And I also want to thank TPPF's great events team, our comms team, our IT team for all the work that they do to put these events on. So, thank you. That's very nice. Thank you. So, why are we here today? Much of today's conversation will revolve around the question of how do we responsibly, transparently, and effectively harness the power of AI, as well as minimize any irreparable harms that may come from it. AI, it seems like it's everywhere. It's in all things. We've seen massive amounts of data and increased computational ability have really taken AI to the next level in what seems like a very short period of time. And like any technology, we at TPPF view AI as a tool, something that can be leveraged for good or something that can be leveraged for harm. AI policy is a top 10 policy priority for the foundation going into the session. Our research and policy efforts advocate that AI serves humanity and not the other way around, emphasizing key principles such as human dignity, privacy, transparency, and accountability, and really emphasizing the humanity, the human dignity, and the autonomy side of things, not as means, but as ends in themselves. There's a lot of excitement in a lot of circles, and although the federal elections produced a trifecta, I'm a former congressional staffer who's very cynical that not much might get done in Congress now or anytime soon, and so that's why foundationally we continue to advocate for a federalist approach, which is arguing that Texas should lead on AI now. As you'll learn today, and as many of, not most of you know, Texas has all the ingredients to lead in responsible innovation and as well as crafting responsible and human-centric AI policy, including things like how AI is used across government as well as for everyday consumers. We've been actively engaged, TPPF, in the policy conversation for a little over 2 years. Today, we are releasing an independent landmark research paper, and as I joked with two of our panelists whom I've testified before twice and 4 times in the last year, the paper has always been forthcoming. In every event that I've testified, it is here. So check that out. Thank you. The co-author of the paper claps for his own paper. But we have a comprehensive, it's a 135 plus page paper. It provides an overview of the history and the technology underlying AI, over a dozen case studies of how AI is being used and can be used in areas from healthcare to education to the justice system, the financial sector, agriculture, and even by creatives and more. We provide a lengthy overview of how local, state, federal, and international policymakers are looking at and approaching AI, as well as some concrete policy considerations. As I mentioned before, we've also provided invited testimony before the House AI Select Committee, the AI Advisory Council, of which 2 of our panelists are on, as well as the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. And I just want to plug real quick our comms and our messaging side of things. We have numerous comms products on AI. We have videos, podcasts, op-eds, highlighting the publication of the paper. We'll have a press release. We recorded a podcast episode on this, and then we'll have an op-ed that will be published soon. And I do want to plug our Rebel Tech podcast. David Dunmore and I are my colleague who will be moderating. We host a very popular tech policy podcast, which happens to be the most downloaded podcast in the history of TPPF. So this is great. We've got a great fan section here, but it's a very fun product. Our comms team does a great job, trying to make what can be interesting, but sometimes mundane stuff interesting. And then the last thing I want to plug is the return of The Layout, which is TPPF's very popular video series where Democratic and Republican lawmakers come in and they talk about an individual bill that they are taking on in the session, and we try to do it in 5 to 7 minutes. So enough from me, my lame jokes. Thank you to my cheering section down in the front row. And I want to introduce my colleague, David Dunmoyer, who will introduce our panelists.
All right, well, I'm still getting over Zach Whiting's calling as a nun. I want to orchestrate that somehow and see if we can make that happen. Well, welcome everybody. As Zach said, my name is David Dunmoyer and I serve as the campaign director for our technology initiative. I don't want to filibuster anymore. We have what I think will be the most engaging panel that we've had on this stage here, an events team. You can hold me to that at the end based on comments and questions online. But in all sincerity, to Zach's point, this is a topic that's incredibly exciting, and with all the fanfare and speculation, I think folks aren't realizing just how active Texas has been this last year and a half heading into the next session. And so I have with me 3 panelists, and I have my bio bullets here so I don't mess this up, who are gonna walk us through what Texas has been doing and what's on the horizon for AI policy. So to my immediate left, I have Luke Hope. Luke is joining us from the Foundation for American Innovation. So again, thankful to have you here from Washington, D.C. and your organization helping sponsor this event. Luke he's a good friend, and he serves as the Director of Policy and Outreach at the Foundation for American Innovation, where he focuses on the intersection of technological innovation and public policy. And to underscore how important that is, I think there are maybe 15 people in the country who get both those components, so we're blessed to have you here. And I would hasten and be remiss if I didn't add that you're a native-born Texan, so we won't hold you flying from Washington, D.C. against you. So Luke, welcome. And to the left of Luke, we have Amanda Crawford, who serves as the Executive Director of the Department of Information Resources. And so that also makes her the State Chief Information Officer. And so in this role, she is responsible for the overall leadership, direction, and daily operation of DIR, an agency with an annual fiscal profile of, I learned today, approximately $7 billion. So a huge footprint in the technology aspect of Texas. The responsibilities for this agency include protecting the state's data and critical technology infrastructure, managing a multi-billion-dollar cooperative contracts program, and providing strategic technology leadership, solutions, and innovations to all levels of Texas government. And as Zach noted, she is also a council member of the Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. So thank you, Amanda. And last, but certainly not least, we have Chairman Giovanni Capriglione. If I can take some liberty here, the short of your bio is you are the guy in the Texas House on technology policy. And we were chatting. For anyone in the audience who works in the space of technology policy, Chair Giovanni Capriglione, Spencer Ward, the director of the IT caucus. If I had $1, sir, for every time I've asked members of the House during the interim, what are you doing on tech policy? What are you doing on AI? And the answer was, well, I just listen to Gio. I wouldn't need a salary here. Chairman Giovanni Capriglione has been in the House since 2012, and he wears many hats, one of which is chairman of PIFs, which is Pensions, Investments, and Financial Services. He's on the House Elections Committee. And then 2 important avenues, he is the chair of the newly created House Select Committee on AI and Emerging Technology, which was created by Speaker Phelan. He's appointed to chair that, as well as serves as the co-chair of the AI Advisory Council. And we'll talk about kind of the differences between those two. And a whole host of other things you do, sir, in your role. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming all 3 of our panelists for this discussion. Okay, so let's start with you, Chair Capriglione. Gio. Okay, we'll do Gio. We'll keep this casual. We were chatting about this beforehand, I think all three of us. I've been in the Texas policy realm for about 6 years now, and I personally feel like there has not been an interim. It's been move fast, break things, breakneck speed. And so we thank you for all of you being here today and pray for your mental health. Can you explain why has this interim been so crazy with the tech policy landscape, and perhaps what has your office been working on in this interim that's made it so jam-packed?
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for being here, and to TPPF, David and Amanda and Luke for being on this panel. What have we been doing? A lot. I mean, it seems, if I go back to where this all started, it was probably the 4 special sessions, right? It just never seemed to end, and when it did finally end, it started again. And I think for us and on tech policy, I think it's just the combination of everyone talking about artificial intelligence, people talking about cybersecurity, people using technology more than they've ever done before, just seeing how much innovation and economic growth the state has gotten, whether it's data centers or crypto or Bitcoin and blockchain, all coming together at the same time. And so for me in my office and our caucus, it has been nonstop. It really has been. There's never been any time off. And to give you kind of how it's not just us, but everyone else is, on the first day of filing, over 1,400 bills were filed. People have been busy, and hopefully they'll stop filing bills.
And do we know how many are generated via AI of those 1,400?
At least one.
At least
I will
one.
tell you that.
Okay. Do we care to comment on bill number? Well, that's and to underscore that, it's not just AI, right? I mean, right to repair, so many other important technology issues. So we'll circle back to that. One of the avenues that I've already mentioned is the Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. So, Amanda, you serve on that council, and you've looked at how Texas is leveraging AI from a public sector perspective, and you've seen some of the really neat, responsible applications of AI. So can you walk us through what are some of the things that you've been looking at? What's the public sector side of responsible AI in Texas?
So thank you, and thanks for asking me to be here, to be able to talk about this important issue that I don't know that we can go anywhere now, certainly not in this space, where we don't get a question about AI, and that's sort of all AI all the time. But it's important, and I think those conversations that we're having highlight the importance of it and highlight why we should be talking about it, because of not only the amazing potential promise to really create efficiencies and drive government forward, but especially in the government space, there's a lot of conversations to be had about, as you said, how we're utilizing that responsibly and safely. So the AI Advisory Council was created by House Bill 2060, and it created a 7-member body to examine how state government is using artificial intelligence. I serve on that committee. Gio does as well, with Senator Tam Parker as co-chairs, and there are members appointed by the governor with a variety of disciplines and specialties in this area. And so for me, one of the most fascinating and rewarding things on being on this council is having, through our meetings, the different agencies come before us and talk to us about how they're deploying artificial intelligence. Some of the conversations have been, we aren't. And that's okay too, to hear from some agencies that are saying, we're waiting, this is a new technology. We have a saying, as the state's technology agency, we hear a lot that, nobody wants to be first, but nobody wants to be last. So, and really you don't want to be bleeding edge, particularly in government tech. And so I get that cautious approach. We have others who are really leaning all in and really using this as a way to sort of revolutionize and rethink how you're delivering government services. So I would say, we also, one of the things we do at our agency is we do a lot of reports and a lot of surveys. So we have some data, and a lot of this data came from the automated decision system survey that the AI Council did, which was survey all the state agencies, ask them to answer our questions about how are you deploying technologies, these AI technologies. So first off, I don't think it'll come to a surprise for anybody that higher ed is deploying artificial intelligence at a level vastly exceeding other state government entities. Research dollars, sort of the focus of what they do. This makes a lot of sense. About 75% of state agencies are deploying 4 or fewer artificial intelligence systems. And there's, the others are actually, we're taking all the higher ed folks out, not deploying any at all for the moment. So some of the things that we're seeing, the greatest use cases are around chatbots, cybersecurity, process efficiencies, and workflow productivity, just workforce productivity in general. One case study that is one of those things that I don't think we always think about, but I think is really an interesting one, is our Department of Public Safety. They've partnered to use artificial intelligence for their fleet of vehicles. I think they have 5,000 plus vehicles across all of DPS. And in order to do the maintenance logs, that's a very paper-intensive process. It's paper logs that have to be updated, that are really subject to human error. You can deploy, they currently have a solution that they're using with artificial intelligence that can do predictive maintenance analytics, that can do all these things in real time. And not only is that saving money, but it's also saving lives, because it means that we have safer vehicles on the road.
So great examples, and we'll come back to you mentioned you don't want to be last, and when it comes to the data security of sensitive information of Texans, I know that's something DIR is laser focused on. I'll shift from that for a second, and let's come to you, Luke. And we're the 2 people on the stage here who don't serve on this council, so maybe you get some more lateral freedom to talk kind of high level. Actually, let's start, because for folks who aren't familiar with the Foundation for American Innovation, y'all have been in the trenches on tech policy since before Zach and I even thought about tech policy as a day job. So you want to talk about what FAI does, and then shift to what are you guys seeing with AI, kind of the national landscape?
Sure. Well, I'll give it the short version. Is we were founded around 2012 out in the Bay Area with the original mission of bridging the gap between the tech industry in Washington, D.C. This was about the time that people started to take notice of tech as an industry and as an issue in public policy. And it turns out that techies and policy wonks don't speak the same language very well. And so that's fundamentally our goal. And we've been, we serve as kind of a think tank and a conduit for these kind of conversations. And, when we started, that really meant Silicon Valley and DC, right? And over the years, what we've seen is people leaving the Valley. Austin is now a tech hub. Miami's now a tech hub. New York's now a tech hub. But also these policy conversations have gone from just happening in DC to now happening in the states. And I think the states are starting to see that Congress doesn't really do a whole lot these days. So where there needs to be new regulations and there needs to be government action, it's primarily happening at the state level. So we're always happy to come, and the partnership that we've had with you all has been absolutely fantastic. To the second part of your question, there's been a lot happening, so you'll have to forgive me if I check my notes here a little bit. So I think people generally agree that ideally Congress would act and we would have some sort of federally preemption on what AI would do. That ain't gonna happen, right? Whether it be in the lame duck or in the next 4 years, Congress doesn't really act, and there's a lot of political reasons behind that. So you've seen a lot of activity at the state level. The really big one that we saw was California had a law called SB 1047 that was passed and then was vetoed by Governor Newsom. And so essentially that law was a pretty onerous regulation. My favorite part of that law, or my most favorite ridiculous part of that law, is that it wanted to establish a public cloud system where we were literally going to build a public data cloud that everyone could access.
Just Cal Compute. They even had a cute name, right?
It was literally called Cali Compute, where anybody could go and log into the cluster. That was vetoed by the governor, and essentially what he said was, we don't like this bill, but we're going to do something. So TBD on what California does. California is going to California. Around the rest of the country, the other big one was Colorado. Passed a law. And what's been really interesting to see out of Colorado, had a lot of the same problems as the California bill, and very onerous and kind of overly restrictive. But Governor Polis kind of came out and said, Essentially, they didn't talk to anybody. They didn't talk to any of the companies. They didn't really talk to civil society. And they passed this bill. And then Governor Polis came back and said, well, now we see these problems, and we're going to have to change a bunch of this stuff. So that leaves a gap. Utah has passed a law that has a big sandbox in it, a regulatory sandbox. If anybody knows anything about Utah, they love sandboxes, and I know Representative Capriglione's bill also has sandbox, so that's been good to see. But really, there's now this gap that is happening. The states are trying to act, but nobody's really gotten it right. And so I think that with Texas legislative session coming up, everyone really is looking around the country. Everyone's looking at Texas and seeing what y'all are going to do. And so I think that that's really the status that we're at right now.
The eyes of the nation are upon Texas.
I mean, we are in Austin.
We are in Austin. And I probably just got canceled by all the UT faculty. I want to, all those points are incredibly well taken. I think the context, before we jump back to you, Gio, I want to provide on this is, depending on who you ask, I'm here, so you're asking me, no real tech policy change has happened at the national level since around 1998. And so this is COPPA, the Children's Online Protection Act, Privacy Protection Act, rather. In 1996, you had Section 230, which, if you've kind of touched the tech policy landscape, you've heard of that from the Communication Decency Act. So my way of saying nothing has happened, Congress, since the end of the 1990s. We're here in 2024. We started this conversation here by talking about what Texas has been doing in the interim. We now have some fruits of the labor, sir. You have a bill that you drafted on artificial intelligence. TRIGA is the acronym, so we're going to start speaking that into existence. Everyone knows it's TRIGA. And the way I want to ask this question is, I think for a year, there's been a lot of folks who have struggled to make sense of the platitudes of what is conservative AI policy. We can talk principles, we can talk values. You have an answer to what conservative AI policy is in your bill. You talk about what that answer is and what that approach is that you and your office have taken.
Sure. It starts with, first of all, what the intent is, right? So the intent on all of our legislation, at least for mine, is to obviously protect and defend the constitutions of the U.S. and Texas. And so what we start is what we want to even pass a law for, right? A lot of times people say, do we need a law? Do we not need a law? Our focus on this bill is to go and protect the constituents of Texas. Okay, it's not to go and protect, in all due respect to the hundreds of associations and lobbyists and others, some of whom are watching right now, saying, well, we don't like this and we don't like that. But my goal and our goal and all of our goal of the legislature should be to go and protect our constituents, right? And to go and protect their liberties, to go and protect their safety, to go and protect their ability to go and have business and grow the economy. And so when we started doing this, I have participated and we have all participated in councils and committees. This is probably my 50th panel that I've been on. I'm part of the multi-state group I've been part of NCSL. We have talked to stakeholders too. And I would say that's one thing that has made it more conservative, is the ability to be transparent and to look for feedback from all sorts of stakeholders and start to incorporate that in what we do. We had one very large stakeholder meeting in May where we got input from consumer advocates, members of the public, big tech, small tech, conservative think tanks, and we've been working it. And as you can imagine, it's hard to come up with a bill that everybody likes, right? The red lines on what people want sometimes contradict with one another. But as we've gone forward, we've tried everything we can to make sure that we've been open about it, and we've heard from business and what they think is conservative. And for them, it's the ability to go and have a level playing field, okay, to be able to, if you're a good actor, be able to have that business and not do any sort of regulation or compliance like in Colorado's bill and others that is just too heavy-handed and burdensome to a company that just wants to create a safe product. On the other hand, we've heard and we've seen the harms that artificial intelligence can and does have on individuals, whether that's social media algorithms or that's misinformation, disinformation, child sexual abuse material. The harms are there, okay? And we can all say, well, I like the good stuff, and I do too. But you can't deny the fact that as conservatives, we have an obligation to protect our kids. We have an obligation to protect your privacy, and we have an obligation to protect your liberties from whether it's big tech or big government. And as we've worked through that, we're going to have kind of, I guess, the calm before the storm. Tomorrow, we're having another stakeholder meeting, and we've received already over 50 requests for changes in our bill. If you come to the auditorium tomorrow at 2 o'clock, you'll see about 230 different groups that have decided to come and talk to us about our bill. And as we work on this draft, we're taking everything into account. We're not going to follow a model that is so progressive that even Gavin Newsom vetoed it, right? But we're also not going to say, hey, do what you want, companies. We'll figure this out in 2 years. Because 2 years of AI and the speed that it's going is too late, okay? And so our goal and our obligation is to create a model, a red state model, that other states can go and look at, and that's our goal, is to make sure that Texas has still the ability to be innovative, have all these awesome companies come to Texas, hire all these workers, use it for government agencies, use it to make efficiencies in public government, but protect their liberties.
And if I could add, because this isn't the first time you've done the stakeholder process, last session, GEO had the Texas Data Privacy and Security Act. And as I recall, and you can jump in and interrupt me at any point, there were folks who were saying, why are we doing this? We don't need a data privacy bill. It's not going to amount to anything. Our information's already out there. And we're a part of this unwitting experiment that social media is winning in. We've seen the Attorney General bring lawsuits against companies who are not complying. This law has only just gone into effect. And the process, the stakeholder process that went into crafting it is what leads to us being here on the stage today and saying Texas has the strongest data privacy law in the country. And we're going to work to ensure that we have the strongest, most pro-innovation, pro-consumer AI bill in the country in Texas too. So I want to shout you out for that because you took some stones. Yeah, seriously. You took some stones for that, and we're here today, and we see the fruits of the labor. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that point, but that was a fight.
What I'll say too, and just, we haven't filed the bill yet. Okay, we have a draft of a bill that has apparently gone around the world, and that's fine. This bill will pass in May, okay? With your help. Thank you.
And we're not going to have 5 special sessions after sine die. Good.
Don't speak too soon.
I know. I just probably lost a bet. Okay, Amanda, let's bring it back public sector. And based on the conversation, I have a lot of additional questions now. One, I'd love to know, can you first follow up on why it's important that certain agencies see maybe it's not the right time now to start applying AI? What is it that agencies can do technologically to get ready for that? Can we start there?
Sure. So I think there's a couple reasons why some agencies are hesitant, or you see that there's agencies that are on the lower end of the spectrum for deploying this technology. So one will go with sort of the more human side of things, is that while AI is not new, this next gen AI, this next evolution, generative AI, all of these things, it is new. And we also hear conversations in state agencies, they're trying, it's hard to read the tea leaves, but you see where things are coming. Nobody wants to invest public dollars in certain technologies and go down a certain path because, again, sometimes the government deployment of technology is not known for being speedy. And so you go to all this effort and then there could be changes that come about. And no one wants to have to rip and replace something that you've invested taxpayer dollars in and waste both time and money. So I think some of that is part of the cautious, sort of the human approach. We're going to wait and see where the policy leads. I think one of the other things that we see from our perspective is, it's 3 factors. So one, it's sort of that human, where's the policy? Number 2, there's a lot of technical debt in the public sector. We've made a lot of advances. One of my colleagues is fond of saying that you had the pandemic that brought along with it legacy modernization in government. And now maybe with AI, we're going to actually have data governance, data management, strong data practices. Because at the end of the day, AI is about data. And it's if it is a secret, it shouldn't be, that data governance, data management practices overwhelmingly in government have not been strong. It's not been an area where there's been a lot of focus. So you have data quality issues, data governance, all sorts of issues that are out there that make it difficult. Now, I know the vendor community will come out and say, well, we have an AI that'll fix that. We'll fix your data issues so that you can then put the AI on top of that. And that may well be, but that's still part of the issue. And then you also just have legacy systems that a lot of these have to go to. And there are a lot of opportunities that we can have with coding through AI that could perhaps help with some of that. I think the other issues, though, is workforce. And this is a state workforce challenge. So we do one of the surveys that we do at our agency is a biennial performance report, and we survey state agencies hundreds of questions on sort of the state of IT. We just last week released the most recent biennial performance report. It's on our website at DIR. I encourage you to look at it and dive in. One of the things that I found interesting is that 2 years ago we had questions on AI, and we asked state agencies about employee readiness to deploy AI. And close to 90% of the agencies who responded said, and they all have to, by the way, that's mandatory, 90% said they had a workforce that was aligned and ready to deploy AI 2 years ago. The report we just released, 30% said that they had a workforce that was aligned and ready. So that's a few things there. One, folks are thinking about it. And number two, the evolution of this technology, it's not just robotic process automation. It's not just the things that a simple chatbot. It has gone so quickly, and I think that's good. I think that means that our public servants are paying attention and they're looking at that. So we have that workforce skilling gap that we're going to need to address to be able to get there.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here for half a second, because all three of those points are very important here. But that middle one is one that I would like to just tap on for a second, because the importance of, you can't just take data. You can't just take this abstract idea of data, throw it into a system, and then have it do exactly what you want. So it's so important that what y'all are doing here and what we're trying to do, at the federal level and across is make sure that the government data is being used in a way that actually produces the outcome with the AI. So the anecdote I like to use is the Department of Defense has been trying to implement AI systems for the past 4 years. They've tried 3 different systems and they failed, primarily because the data that they were using was not properly cleaned and properly processed in a way that could be used for these things. So to the extent that government agencies are thinking about this, right? I'm glad that we're in this post-COVID era, but we need to kind of move forward and try and get this information into a place to where once the workforce is ready,
right,
then we can move forward with the technology and get the technology there.
And the survey that this same report shows that, which is great, that we're seeing that progress. We have a lot of important data initiatives that we've spearheaded at our agencies, and we've seen the data maturity across agencies grow, but it's at a pace now where folks are really skyrocketing to be able to do that. One other thing that I think I'd be remiss to talk about that makes it AI use in public sector a little bit different is the very important laws that we have around records retention and transparency in the Public Information Act. So we have Chapter 441 of the Government Code that is the Records Government Act that talks about the very important classification and retention periods for all government records. Then we have our Chapter 552 of the Government Code, the Public Information Act. So with generative AI, and I'm sorry, Microsoft, I'm going to talk about Copilot, but cool, really great, wonderful technology. But no, we're not going to record and transcribe all of our meetings. That's a challenge. We don't need all of a sudden every prompt, if someone's deploying, and I'm not just picking on Microsoft, don't come at me, pick any other LLM. Does every prompt now become a public record? Is every draft that is created through an LLM a classified public record? I would argue it definitely falls under the definition. Whether it's accepted or not is a whole nother thing. So now we have new mountains of data that we're creating that have to be stored. That's going to cost money. It's also going to talk about the response and being able to release all of this information. It's not insurmountable, but it's a totally different facet for public sector that needs to be paid attention to.
Well, in that, if I can, Gio, I've also been to 50 AI events in the last year. And the data part gets talked about in that abstract light, which is you need data inputs to have the output. And then there's the black box and things happen. We don't know, but there's an output. When we talk about Texas having the ingredients to succeed on AI policy, having a strong data privacy bill as a prerequisite is a necessity. And I think that's part of the reason why, I mean, back to California, they had some real issues in their data privacy law. And it was so bad that they had to go to a ballot initiative after they passed their law to fix it. And so the point again is that the pieces in Texas are coming together for next session. I think this is all incredibly important points. Luke, coming to you, one component of conservatism, if we can get highfalutin and philosophical for a second here, it doesn't matter who your muse is as a conservative thinker. There are folks who will find a way to justify resisting change as a part of the conservative ethos. Now, you of all people would say that there is something truly conservative and beautiful about embracing AI. And can you break down for us, why is it important that conservatives, A, embrace AI, but then B, lead on AI policy?
For sure. I think, so there's essentially two really important pieces, or actually three important pieces, two of which are positive, one of which is, shall we say, negative. So the first is economic dynamism, right? If you look at the United States, if you look at what we've done for the past 30 to 40 years, the vast majority of our economic dynamism has come from the tech industry. Like, quite frankly, we just don't build things anymore, which is a whole separate conversation that we need to have. And so this is the next frontier of technological innovation. This is the new thing, right? I think that a lot of the time people like to compare this general intelligence, these LLMs, to kind of the internet. I think there's limits to that comparison, but there is a fundamental truth that the internet and the dawn of the digital age did usher in a new era of economic dynamism, right? And so to the extent that you care about the United States continuing to dominate and to be an economic powerhouse, that is a very important element here that we need to consider. And you need to make sure that just as the internet, right, and this is where the comparison gets a little tenuous, right? So we chose to not regulate the internet holistically. We chose to not go in and just like completely strap it with regulations. There were guardrails. We put guardrails into place. But letting companies innovate and build and do new things is a really important, and I think a fundamentally conservative idea, because of the end impact of promoting economic dynamism. And then the second part, which I think is just as important, which we don't talk about quite enough, is what Amanda's talking about, right? Like using AI to shrink government, to save taxpayer money. These are all things that we can do and we are doing and we should be doing. And I think that, this is, to the extent that the Doge Commission has really like captured the.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I was hoping that was gonna
it's
happen.
captured the imagination. I had to bring it up. To the extent that it's a real thing that we're really going to do. The idea of going into government agencies and trying to find ways to create new efficiencies, to find ways to save money. Waste, fraud, and abuse is the term we always like to use. There's a lot of ways that artificial intelligence can be used to help solve some of those problems. Quite frankly, at the federal level, there's a lot more that needs to be done. I'm very proud of what Texas has done. I think that y'all are doing a great job. Hopefully, the federal government can learn a little bit from what y'all are doing, but we can get Amanda up to DC to have some of those meetings.
Happy to share.
Right, but I think the third element of this is, geopolitical issues. Right, the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is China. We are in a place right now where we are in a race for artificial and general intelligence. We are in a race for who is going to control, who is going to be the hegemon for the next 100 years or however long, or depending on which of my colleagues you want to listen to. And so China's competitive advantage is central planning. There are advantages to central planning. You can take money from one place and you can put it to research and development, and you can do a lot of really cool things, right? America's competitive advantage is competition and allowing people to innovate freely and openly in ways that promote American values. And if you look at the past since we opened up China and Nixon opened up China, right? Like competition tends to win. Like we are still cutting at the edge, and so ensuring that America remains the global hegemon in technology and innovation, I think, is a really important conservative aspect. So there's you got the positive vision, and then you got the bogeyman of China in there as well.
Okay, so let's take this China jumping off point and go a little dystopian for a second here. And I think for folks who are tuning in the audience and online, I don't like going to events where it's all doom and gloom, but I think it's important that we underscore what happens if we don't get this regulatory framework right from a civil liberties, from a human agency and human dignity perspective. Let's start with you, Gio. What is best and worst case scenario if we don't have any guardrails to protect and preserve humanity with AI?
Well, first, before I go into my favorite part, dystopia, I want to talk a little bit about regulations in China still a little bit. I mean, whenever we have this conversation, people are like, okay, well, we want to be competitive. And America is competitive because of the system of government that it has and the freedoms that it has and the laws that have been made. The first cars really invented in the late 1800s, and the first laws regulating cars and roads happened in the early 1900s. And that did not stop our innovation in cars. What it did, it came up with a whole bunch of different models to say, hey, we're gonna have these vehicles on the road, let's make sure the roads connect, let's create a system where there's high-risk situations that we want to address, and we have unacceptable uses as well for what cars and people in cars cannot do. And what that resulted in was mass manufacturing, America having more roads than any other place, just the incredible amount of economic drivers that it caused. But it did start with us deciding what the rules of the road, for lack of a better way of saying it, would work for all of that. And 100 years later, how many people would rather be in an American car than a Chinese car? Okay? And when we start looking at the bills and the frameworks that we're doing, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to protect Americans' freedoms and liberty. And it started with the privacy bill, okay? Because every single day, you are constantly, and your kids are being constantly, and your employers are constantly keeping track of your personal and private information. And it's not your social security number. I don't know how many forums have been where people are worried about their social security number. You can forget about your social security number, okay? It's about when you go to bed, it's what church you go to, it's what you bought yesterday, and what you're probably gonna buy tomorrow. Okay, it's what your kids like looking at and what's going to keep them on their phone for another 3 hours. That's the information that's being collected all the time. And it doesn't have to be in the wrong hands, okay? It has to be in anybody's hands, but you can think about it being in the government's hands. So in our bill, in our framework, we talk about certain things that are unacceptable. And that would be in the creation of child sexual abuse material. And that goes without saying, it should, but there's already people in our stakeholder meeting tomorrow who are opposed to us banning that in the bill. Okay, I would love to have a conversation with them. We have things in our bill to talk about social scoring. You all know in China about how their government uses things that you've said, places you've been, to make determinations on what you can do in the future. Those are the kind of things that we want to ban. Let's talk about how some people use AI under the cloak of law enforcement, okay? And this is a touchy subject in Texas, but I got to be honest with you. There is a point where our founding fathers did not actually want a police state, where they did not want cameras on every single road or on every single post. They didn't want to have dragnets, where they didn't want, which is what's happening in Texas today, okay, where there's license plate readers everywhere, where there's cameras checking to see if you're in compliance with code, okay? There's apps, for instance, right now today that are being used by Dallas in particular, and probably other places, that they'll go and they'll compare photos of people in crimes to the billions of photos that are available on the internet. And they're comparing those potential criminals with your kids, with you, that have posted it on Facebook and others. That's not what our founding fathers intended at all. And those are the kind of things that we have to protect, because the most dangerous part of all of this is the ability for government to have their hands on this and use it against us.
Okay, yeah, that's a bleak picture, and I think it gets back to the point of why those responsible guardrails are a necessity. One last question for you before I get to the Robin round. There was an article that you tweeted out a few weeks ago that was talking about a child that committed suicide because of interactions with an AI chatbot. Can you talk about what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, we've all watched dystopian movies, right? Where we'll start with Hal, right? Where you start to feel as if this AI robot has personality, has emotions, knows what you think. And it is not, it apparently, I mean, we all have that. It's a word that's difficult for me to say. It's like anthropomorphic, right? Where we start to believe that these programs, that these systems, that these servers are human and human-like. And the better they become, the better their voices become, the better the avatar becomes, the more likely it is that people will start to associate with them and share feelings with them in a way that they would only have ever done with another human. And there's this one, it's called character.ai. After this article came out, I had gone and I downloaded and looked at it, and you can go and generate different characters that you're interested in. Game of Thrones characters, comic book heroes and that kind of stuff. And AI is very good at what it does, which is trying to guess what you like and trying to make it personal. And unfortunately, there are people that really become affected and addicted to these sort of things. And I will say that some of them are meant to be addictive, okay? And in at least one case, it appears that a child ended up committing suicide as a result of that relationship. And what I would say is there are harms to what it's going. I mean, there's a lot of benefits. And just like cars, there's a lot of benefits, but we gotta stop some of the bad stuff.
Well, I'm getting the notice from our timekeeper, so I'll ask Amanda and Luke, last thoughts, takeaways when it comes to AI codes of ethics, guardrails. What's one thing you want to impart on our audience that we need to get right to ensure Texas is leading the country?
I think for us and what we're hearing, what we see with agency usage is transparency. I mean, I think being able to keep that trust that the constituents have in us to be able to deliver these services, we have to be transparent about the technologies we're using, how their data is being used, why we're collecting it, how long we're keeping it, where it's being stored, all of those sorts of really just fundamentals of data protections and those sort of principles, whether it's used in AI technology or whatever the next latest greatest thing is going to be down the road. So I think transparency.
Yeah, and I'll just be real brief. I think on the public sector implementation, I think the big risk that I see is that private use of AI outpaces government use of AI, and then software eats the state. So we need to make sure that the government is keeping up with these innovations, or else bad things can happen. On the private sector side, I think it's important that we need to make sure that we're distinguishing between general purpose technologies and how we regulate those versus like the actual implementations of those general purpose technologies. So to the degree that harms are happening, that they, if there's a specific implementation that is creating that harm, then we should definitely go after that. If there's a specific implementation of AI that is being used to violate people's civil rights, for example, or whatever, then that is an entirely different conversation than what we should do with kind of AI generally as a general purpose technology.
Great. Well, we have time for a couple of questions, and I think we have two microphones, Erica to my right, Peyton to my left. Before I call on questions, we'll get through more if you keep them concise and end it with a question mark, so please do be mindful so we can get through as many as possible. Do you have any questions on this side of the room here? One question at the very back there.
Thanks everyone for discussing with us something that is so complicated for many, as for me. I want to thank in particular Mr. Capriglione, which I might pronounce Capriglione because that's where I come from. As a former attorney, I'm particularly grateful for the last comments you made. I'm terrified at the idea that evidence could be just created by computers. Is there anything that you are doing, or then at the federal level, in terms of making confidentiality real again? Lawyers and doctors in particular. Is anyone ever suggesting, if not, making it a law, that they should not use technology to store our information? That, because the psychological fear or psychiatric even fear that I think is going to grow is that we will stop saying the truth to the lawyers and the doctors, which will then be very counterproductive. So I just wonder if there is any conversation on these issues.
About protecting people's confidentiality in general. I mean, So part of the challenge of our laws is trying to create laws that are technology agnostic. Okay, in other words, this is against the law regardless of whether you used Excel to do this, whether you used AI to do this, or an abacus, right? How do we go and say that these things are not acceptable or not? I mean, I personally, I mean, obviously having worked on the privacy bill, this is one of the most important things for me, right? Is to be able to protect people's confidentiality and privacy. And part of the risk I see is it's becoming almost impossible to protect people. But part of it is also about self-awareness. You don't have to reveal all the information all the time. And what I want to do is try and protect that information that you don't give consent to be revealed, to not be revealed. And in terms of lawyers and doctors, those laws are still going to be there, right? And without getting too into it, I mean, it's a long question, but for me, right now, we're still going to require a doctor to be a human. We're going to require a lawyer to be a human and to have those licenses. And for them to be able to retain those licenses, they have to protect patient confidentiality still, and they'll still have to have attorney-client privileges, whether they use AI or something else.
I would say at the federal level, there's a kind of a movement, a grassroots movement towards getting away from cloud infrastructure and being able to, if you physically control your hard drive, that it is a different situation for a court to come in and get that versus if it's sitting on, a cloud service. This is for sensitive information, obviously. But this is also, I would like to shout out Senator Ted Cruz on this. He's now the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, which is great. One of the things that he is very, very concerned about with regards to AI specifically is government records and the privacy of people as they're being put into these systems. That is a very tricky question. It's a very big question. There's obviously different kinds of information. There's different levels of private information and what that means. But at the federal level, there are conversations and people are starting to look at this. And I do think that with the Republican unified government, there is an opening to have a broader conversation about surveillance and surveillance reform.
Well, thank you, first of all, to all the panelists for sharing your insight. So I think that many of us on this side of the Atlantic would agree that EU's general policy on, the General Data Protection Regulation is too restrictive for AI development. That said, I wonder if any of you would like to comment on a couple of things that we can learn from and perhaps borrow, and a couple of things that we definitely do not want when we think about our own regulations in terms of just using the EU's regulation as a sort of reference point. Thank you.
Well, if I could start, the way that we would look at it is there's definitely things we could look at, and we have looked at from other states and other countries, right? In some cases, they started earlier, right? And so that gives us some benefit of being able to see what they got right and what they haven't. And so some of the concepts that they have, even in terms of regulating the data and protecting people's data, I think has been important in what they did. On the other hand, kind of I think to your point, we don't want our rules to be so cumbersome and that you're guilty before you start, right? For instance, what we look at is not having to provide all this information about the data you used and the training you did, like other states and countries do, before you even implement and deploy your system, right? That doesn't make sense. And also, we have to talk about what the penalties are, right? We do want penalties, otherwise there has to be some enforcement mechanism. But there's a difference between, in some cases, 30% of the revenue of your company if you make a mistake, versus our strategy, which is we're going to let you have an opportunity to fix the problem, okay? If you don't fix the problem, then we're going to have a problem, right? But if you go ahead and you're given a warning and you go and change the way you're doing it, because what we don't want is we don't want people to stop developing, but we do want them to behave.
Obviously not a policymaker, but I was recently on a panel on AI with, it was an international panel, and there was a general from the French gendarmerie, I think I said that properly, and he was responsible for creating that country's AI code of ethics. And one of the things that they did that I thought was fascinating and very, very French, but is that he, along with others on his team, were doing a huge public education campaign. and they would make themselves available in cafes, and just would have office hours. So for anyone who wanted to come in and they had concerns about AI, concerns about how government was using their AI, questions about it, technology questions, all of those sorts of things. And I thought, okay, that's actually, because to me, one of the biggest challenges that we have, and if we were going like kind of worst case, what's the scenario other than robot overlords, ruling all of us with AI, would actually be such a lack of trust in innovative technologies like AI that government can't innovate and that we can't deploy these. So to me, it seems like a real big education effort would be really helpful. And maybe we could also go out and have good coffee too while we're
I was thinking,
while
we
we're
can
at
have
it.
coffee hours at Capitol Cafe.
That's
and
exactly
people come
right.
in and-
Yeah.
If we do it at Torchy's, I'm there.
Okay, right. Yeah, we'll do tacos, not coffee.
Yeah, of course. Just very briefly on the GDPR, I think there's a lot of takeaways from GDPR, but one of the big takeaways is to make sure that the regulation is broad enough and flexible enough to take into account changes in technology, right? GDPR was drafted and implemented in an era where cookies was the primary way of tracking people online, and that's why if you go to Europe, you have to click through a bunch of like very annoying pop-ups because they're trying to solve for that specific problem. Well, we're moving away from cookies right now. Like we're moving and we're transitioning. That's not to say that the law is necessarily terrible, but you need to make sure that you have that flexibility so that when the technology changes, the principles of the law still can apply.
One last question, Matt.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. It's kind of a twofold question. The first one is, y'all touched on the CCP and their implementation of AI. Do y'all believe that the implementation of these policies of guardrails against an adversary that doesn't respect guardrails at all will put us behind the fold? And the second is that, thank you, Chairman, for authoring this. Is there any appetite on the Senate side when it comes to this legislation?
If the question is, are we worried about our laws restricting our abilities to compete globally against our bad actors, that's one of the things we want to make sure it doesn't happen, right? But again, it's banning child sexual abuse material generators is hopefully not the defining factor between that or social scoring or those kind of things. But we are cognizant of that because what we want, obviously, is we are in a competition, right? And you throw in quantum computing, you throw in all of this kind of stuff, and it's one of those things. Well, the first group to figure out how to do all of this at the highest level will win, right? It used to be. I mean, maybe this is an odd way of looking at it, but it used to be nuclear weapons, right? That was how that was all going to be decided. But you can see, and Amanda can tell you how many cyber attacks are happening every single day, how much data is trying to be stolen. I mean, the war is virtual now, and AI kind of brings that to the next level. Well, I forget the second question. What was it? Oh, the Senate. Yes. We have already reached out to senators. And obviously Senator Tan Parker is going to be helping us on, not just on our council, but on some of this legislation as well. I think other senators themselves are interested. I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, if every single senator and every single state rep ends up filing some AI bill at some point. So we're looking forward to working with the Senate, with the governor's office, and with other members of the House as well.
Any final comments here?
If you want me to talk about China, I'll talk about China.
I mean, why twist your arm?
No, I just think that Representative Capriglione is right? Like the struggle is finding that balance, right, and making sure that any so there is a certain contingent that would say that we just should not touch it at all because we shouldn't regulate anything because that's gonna ruin everything. I don't think I think there's a lot of rules that are already in place that we need to figure out how they currently interact with artificial intelligence. But I also think that this is if we're thinking about China, we need to make sure that we're distinguishing what we're talking about when we talk about AI. Because there's a very big difference between what's happening in frontier models, what's happening in these labs at Stanford and other places, what's happening, and making sure that the truly cutting edge of this technology is allowed to innovate and do those things. Whereas the kind of broader proliferation across the economy, right? Like whether or not there's a small restriction on ChatGPT. whether you can use it and how you can use it is less important, I think, when we're talking about geostrategic competition than restrictions on kind of cutting edge research and those frontier models and the deployment of kind of the next generation that we're looking at.
Well, I'm getting the 1 minute notice, and I think this is a perfect place to bring this to a close. Before I ask to thank our panelists, I want to kind of piggyback on what Zach opened with, which is, yes, I was the one guy who clapped for my own research paper, so I had my Jeb Bush moment. But I do want to encourage you all, if you're interested in the Foundation's approach to AI, what our policy recommendations are, kind of how that fits in, please visit our website, texaspolicy.com. It literally just got published, or else we'd have hundreds of copies. Our comms guy, John Monty's here, so reach out to him if you want a copy. We exist at the Foundation, provide the intellectual ammunition so that Texas can lead the nation with responsible tech policy. That's what we intend to do. That's why we have our panelists here today. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause and thanking our panelists for being here today.